Hey everyone, welcome to day 12, and today we will be learning about promises, async and await, and we'll also be building an online currency converter app. So we have a pretty interesting session today, and we'll be covering quite a lot of topics. I hope you guys are ready for it, and let me know in the comments how you guys have been doing. I am Gaurav, and I'll be covering the front end training in the Devsnest bootcamp. So far, we have had 12 sessions, and now going ahead, we'll be covering a lot of the advanced topics. Yesterday, we covered, the latest ES6 plus syntax and all the new features which are being used in modern JavaScript. Today, we'll be learning all of those features. I mean, not learning, applying all of the features which we had covered yesterday and learning more advanced concepts. Okay, um, let's just wait a minute longer and then we'll continue with today's session. And let's get started. So good evening to everyone in the chat. All right, so the first thing that we will be learning today is promises. Okay, so what is a promise? So, a promise basically represents an outcome of an operation which will happen sometime in the future, right? So, we don't know when that operation is going to be completed, but a promise allows us to represent that sort of a situation where the outcome will be available sometime in the future. So, to understand this, let's consider an example. Suppose I borrow 10,000 bucks from you, all right, and then I promise you that I will return this money to you after 2 days, all right. Now only one of the two scenarios can happen. Either I return you the money after 2 days, or I do not return you the money, right? So if I return you the money after 2 days, that means the promise has been fulfilled. Okay. And if I do not return you the money after 2 days, that means I have not kept my promise. The promise has been rejected. Okay. So these are one of the terminology that you need to remember, that whenever the outcome is known to us and it's a successful outcome, that means the promise was fulfilled. Okay. And if there was some problem, or I did not keep my promise, then the outcome of the promise was that it was rejected. Now let's try and implement the same scenario which I explained you right now, in terms of promises. So what we will do is, so we will create a promise. So let promise. Okay, let me hide this part. And we create a promise using the promise object. All right, so we create a new instance of a promise. It receives a callback function. Okay, we can pass a callback function, and over here it gets two parameters. One is resolve, right? The other one is reject. So as I was explaining you, when I want something, when there's a favorable outcome, we can make use of this resolve function. We can resolve the promise that represents a successful outcome. And if there is a problem, something happened, there is some error, in that case we can reject the promise. All right, so both of these are functions itself. So what we will do is, we will make use of a timeout. Okay, so set timeout, and then this timeout accepts a function, and then after a delay of say 3000 milliseconds, this is to represent, you know, 2 days. We really don't want to wait for 2 days, but just to showcase that we are waiting for a certain period of time. All right, so this is to represent 2 days, and what we will do is we will resolve the value, which is 10,000. All right, so this is a promise. I gave you a promise that after a duration of 2 days I will return back your 10,000 bucks. Okay, so this, this timeout represents the delay of 2 days, the duration of 2 days. Now I want to represent a successful outcome, that I have given you back your money after 2 days. All right, so let's take a look at how we would represent this outcome. So I would say promise dot then, right? This, we make use of the then function. Okay, the promise object has a special function on it, okay, which is known as the then, right? uh, we pass a callback function to it over here, right? So this function will get money as a parameter, right? And we're using arrow functions, which we had learned yesterday. And what we will check is if money equals, 10,000, then I just log yay, um, I got my money back. All right, and suppose, okay, you do not get your money on time, so that means the promise has been rejected. Okay, so to handle that scenario, we make use of the catch function, which is also available on the promise, right? So instead of writing promise dot catch like this separately, what I can do is I can, you know chain a promise like this, okay, and write the catch statement right over here, so that when there is a successful outcome, this particular function will be called. And in case there is some error, right, okay, when the promise is rejected, then the function that we are specifying over here, the callback function that we are writing over here, that function will be called. All right, and in that case we can say something like, and we can basically log the error message. Okay, so these are the this is how the situation is represented in terms of promises. So I have an outcome which will be whose outcome will be known after a certain period of time. All right, so we're using a delay of 3000 milliseconds. So after 3000, after 3 seconds, we will resolve the promise. Okay, we will what we are trying to do is, represent the fact that I have kept my promise. Okay, so in order to represent that I have kept my promise, I'm calling the resolve function, right? And since this is the I have kept my promise, that means the callback that we have specified over here inside this then block, right? This function will be called the moment this resolve statement is executed. Okay, and then we are passing this value over here, right? So this value will be received to this function as a parameter. Okay, so this callback function will receive the value 10,000. then we'll just check whether the money is 10,000 or not. If that's the case, we will be logging this value in the console. So let's try this example out. Okay, let me zoom in the console. Let's save the changes, and 1, 2, and 3, you can see that we are getting this message from the console, yay, I got my money back, right? So this represents the scenario where I have kept my promise. Now, for example, I want to represent the situation where I did not keep my promise. So what I will do is I'll comment out this statement, and after 2 days have passed, all right. But in terms of programming, we are saying 2 days is equal to 3 seconds. So I will say reject, and I will pass a reason for rejection. I will say new error. This is another object which is available in JavaScript, and I will specify a message over here, and I'll say I lied. You're not getting your money back. Okay. So let's see what happens in this case. So you can see that after 3 seconds elapsed, this function was called. This time we made use of the reject statement. Okay. So when this statement was executed, we created a new error object. Then instead of the then block, since the promise was rejected, the callback function which we specified, okay, whenever we want to catch any errors or any issues, we write that piece of code inside the catch block, right? And we are printing this crying emoji, and then we are reading the message from the error object. All right. So whatever we are passing over here as the string to this error object, right? Whatever is passed to the constructor, that is available as a property called message on this object. All right. So that is why we are seeing this message on the console. All right. So is this clear to you guys? What a promise is, what happens when the promise is fulfilled, and what happens when a promise is rejected? All right. So you can represent different scenarios using promises. So this was one scenario where we considered the example that I borrowed a money, then I promise that I'll give it back to you after 2 days. So if I kept my promise, then we did this particular thing. We logged this message to the console, and if I did not keep my promise, right, we logged this message to the console, right? So is this clear to you guys? You can let me know in the comments. Okay, and a promise has these states, all right? So the first state is the fulfilled fulfilled state, all right? What this indicates is when the promise was successfully resolved, when the promise was kept, right? So this is represented by the fulfilled state, and whatever we specify over here inside the then block, that is that was the function which will get called when the promise is fulfilled, right? So a successful outcome is represented by the state. The next one is the rejected state, right? So whenever a promise is rejected, so you know in case of any error or a rejection, this is what is represented by the rejected state, right? So the code inside the catch block will be called the callback function, which we specify within the catch function, that will be called, right? And then there is this pending state, right? This is the initial state. So the duration that we were waiting for the promise to to get an outcome basically, right? So in this case, the promise will remain pending for a duration of 3 seconds, right? So the pending state represents whether, the outcome isn't known to us till now. Okay, that is what is represented by the pending state. So it's neither fulfilled nor rejected. Okay, this is what is represented by the pending state. And then we have the settled state, right? It represents whether, it basically represents the outcome, okay, whether successful or unsuccessful. uh, that is represented by the settled state. Okay, so whether it is, so it represents either a fulfilled state or a rejected state. Okay, so we know a clear outcome for the promise when the promise has been settled. All right, so these are the different states which are associated with the promise. And then we also learned that, you know what is promise chaining. This is one example of chaining, right? So we can even chain more statements. So for example, let's look at a couple of more examples of how we can add another chain to this. So there was a doubt in the chat. Can you repeat promise once again? So I'll cover that in the doubt session right after the class. And then when will the catch function execute if the promise is not resolved? Will it take errors in the chaining of process? In Will it take errors in the chaining of promise resolve? I did not get the second part. So when will the function execute? So browsers generally have a built-in mechanism. We wait for a certain period of time. If that time duration has elapsed, right? Uh, the promise will be rejected. So generally, this mechanism is built into fetch APIs. So we'll be learning what a fetch API is as well. But if nothing happens, if no such mechanism is available, then nothing will happen basically. So it will be kept as it is unless and until there's some memory leak, or there's some issue. So it will be left as it is. But in general, a promise will be either resolved or rejected. That is how the implementation goes, right? Yeah, the catch block will only occur either when an exception occurs, or when we are calling the reject statement explicitly. Okay, so that is when the catch block will be called, whatever is specified within the catch. The callback which is available over here, that will be called when there's an error, right? So over here we explicitly saying we're calling reject, right? uh, Now let's understand a few more scenarios with promises. Okay, what is promise chaining? Let's understand that. So what we want to do now is, suppose you received your money, right? I kept my promise and you have received the money, and based on the amount that you have received, you want to do some more further things on it. So suppose you receive some extra money, you want to use that extra amount and buy something else. If you have received the amount as it is, you just credit that amount back to your bank. Or you know suppose the amount received is less than the amount which you had lended, right? So that is another scenario that we can look at. Okay, and let's take a look at how we can implement such a scenario. So what we will do is we will write a new function, money received. So actually, let's, even before that, let me show you another example, a very simple example of promise chaining. So for example, I return whatever is the money received, right? and then I add another then statement over here. I chain whatever is the response of this, the first uh, promise which was resolved. I can provide the outcome of that to the next promise in the chain, right? So that is how I can chain multiple promises. Now this money will be available over here, right? The money. So what chaining allows us to do is that based on the outcome of one promise, we can decide what to do in the next one, right? You receive the output of one promise as the input for the next, you know, promise basically. So once we get the money, right, uh, I'll just log the amount which was received. So amount received, okay, which is money. Let me just call this as amount received like this. Okay. So after a duration of, let me hide the rejection block. Let's keep this block once again. So after a duration of 3 seconds, okay. So you can see that I made a mistake over here, right? This part went ahead successfully. Yay, I got my money back, right? And there's no function such as console, right? We needed to use the console.log function. Instead, I just wrote console. So this threw an error. So when this error occurred, it was logged to in the console, right? So you can see this crying symbol and the message which was, this message is coming from the browser itself. So we can see that console is not a function, right? So I hope the question which was asked in the chat is cleared with this example. Anyways, now let's correct this, and you can see after a duration of 3 seconds, we can see that, you know, whatever was the output of this promise, we got that as the input for the next promise in the chain, right? So this is how you can chain promises and receive the outcome of, based on the outcome of one promise, you can decide what to do, going ahead. So now let's do one thing. Let's handle this scenario. So we'll say amount received. Okay. And so what we will do is we'll return a new promise over here. Return new promise like this. And it will also get a resolve and a reject callback functions as parameters. And what we want to do is we want to check if amount received. Let's do one thing. Let's take this value in a variable. So let money lended, for example, equals 10,000. So if you notice, I have used this underscore, right? So these are one of the latest features. So you can use a underscore to separate, thousands. You can format numbers using underscores basically. So when I instead of so basically I wanted to say 10,000, right? But comma is not a valid thing. Instead, we can use an underscore to, represent large numbers and format the numbers like this. This is internally ignored by JavaScript, this underscore. But this is how you can format numbers so that it's more readable to somebody who's writing the code and reading the code, right? Um, so so if money equals money lended, we do something, then so if amount received, okay, is greater than the amount the money lended, right? In that case, we'll do a resolve and we'll just say amount received minus amount, sorry, money lended, right? So that should give us the difference, okay? Else if the amount received was less than the money lended. So in that case, we want to reject the outcome. Okay, we want to throw a new error. Okay, we want to say, oh, wait, I haven't received the entire amount. Okay, and then the last scenario is that the amount received and the money lended, both of them are same, right? So in that case, we'll just resolve 0. Okay, just to represent that there's no difference between the amount received and the money lended. Okay, so these are the different actions that we can take based on the money received. So let's chain this function over here. Let's provide the money received function over here. Okay, and let's save this. And what we want to do is, now since this once again returns a promise, let's chain this further. Okay, so I'll add another then statement over here, and we'll get an outcome, right? Based on the outcome, we'll be doing something. Okay, and what we want to say is suppose, so this is basically telling us the amount of extra money that we have received, right? So instead of calling it outcome, let's call it as extra money, for example. So if extra money is there, right, I will log to the console. Wow, my friend is generous. Okay, now I can buy some extra, buy something with the extra amount. Okay, and we'll just log that extra money in the console as well. And irrespective of whether we have some saving or not, we will be depositing whatever is the remaining amount in the bank, right? That is what we want to do. So we will say deposit the uh, you lended amount back to the bank. This is what we want to do, right? So let's try this out. So we have seen that over here we're specifying the value as 10,000, right? So it's printing to the console that, yay, I got my money back, and deposit the lended amount back to the bank, right? Because uh, the amount that was received, it went through all of these conditions. Okay, so this is where we ended up. We resolved with the value of 0, and so this console.log statement was printed. So we can have a series of chains, right? Based on the initial outcome, we did something, and then based on the outcome of this thing, we did something more, right? Now let me change this to say 10,500. Okay, so after 2 days have passed, we are getting this message, wow, my friend is generous, now I can buy something with the extra amount. Okay, and whatever is remaining, we are lending that, deposit the lended amount back to the I have misspelled it, back to the bank. Okay, so this is the these are the two favorable outcomes, right? And let me specify a lesser amount, say 8,000 for example. So you can see it says that, oh wait, I haven't received the entire amount. Suppose I get rid of this statement, okay, and it will print, okay, yay, I got my money back. You got some money back, but then you come to realize, oh wait, it's not the entire amount. Okay, so this is what is happening because we went inside this piece of block, the reject block, and this message was, you know, this error happened, and then this was caught in the catch block. Okay, so this is how you can chain multiple promises, and this allows you to do, take more action based on, the outcome of, one particular action, right? So you can keep on passing the outcome to the next promise, and based on that you can take further actions. Okay, all right. So are there any more? So there's a question: how did money received get the argument? So instead of using a, writing the function right there, we passed a reference to this function, right? So if you remember earlier when I had written the function over here, right, like this, right? The callback function over here, and we had written a log statement, and whatever was the outcome for this was made available as the input for this, right? It was available over here, right, as the input, correct? So that is how over here we're just passing a reference to that function. So whenever this promise is resolved, this function will be called and it will receive this value as a parameter. Okay, so there are multiple ways, right? Either you can define the function right there, or you can provide a reference to the function. So it's the same thing that we have been learning so far, that either you can define the callback function right there, or you can provide a function reference, right? Okay, so so are there any more doubts? And another way by which we can represent this example is that we can so this then function, instead of writing a catch block, okay, we can also specify the catch function right over here, okay, as the second parameter. So let me just comment this out for now. These two additional catch promise chains, let me comment them out, and instead of writing a separate catch over here like this, let me just copy this callback function. Let me comment it out over here, and you can specify the the success, right, the fulfill state, what needs to happen on the successful outcome, as well as the rejected state, whatever needs to happen when the promise is rejected, right, within the then function as well. So let me just paste the function which I copied over here, right? So this is the first parameter to then the success block, and this is the second parameter, which is the error block or the catch block, right? So if I save this, okay, uh, so now it's just printing this information, right? Now it's printing, yay, I got my money back. Let me comment this out and let me replace it with the reject scenario. And you can see that now, even though we have specified it over here, we have not written any explicit catch statement, still this particular piece of code is being called. Okay, so this is how you can write uh, a successful as well as a rejected scenario right within the then function. Okay, you can provide multiple callbacks over here like this. Okay, so let me just copy this and undo the changes, and I'll keep this one this syntax over here for reference. I'll keep this commented. Okay. All right. So is this clear to you guys? And similarly, just like we have a successful handling, error handling, and then irrespective of whether there were any errors or whatever happened, like whether the promise was resolved successfully or whether the promise was rejected, we have something known as the finally function. So whatever we write over here, uh, it will be called irrespective of the outcome. Okay. So whether there was an error or whether the promise was resolved successfully, irrespective of what happens with that promise, the finally, the callback function which is provided to the finally function, right, will be, it's always called irrespective of whether the promise was resolved or rejected. Okay. So this is another uh, concept which you guys need to know with respect to promises. Now, where is this concept widely used? This is quite widely used whenever we are trying to make an API request. So, an API is basically an application programming interface. So, using an API, we can connect to external services. Okay. And these services allow us to get some more information. So for example, we might have a weather service which might give us the weather information for today. What's the weather like in your city. Okay, we might have a service like that. uh, Suppose we have a service which basically we give it a uh, amount in one currency and it tells us what is the converted amount in another currency, right? So we can have a service which is giving us the currency conversion. So there are multiple services which are available, and in order to access those services we make use of to call those services we make use of something known as, these services are known as an API. So what these services give to us is basically a it they give us a response which is available as the response is in a structured format. Okay. And that is generally represented by an object, rather that is represented in a format which is understood by somebody who is consuming that service. And so let me explain to you guys with a better example. So today we'll be building something known as a currency converter, right? So I have identified a service which allows us to get that information. Okay. So suppose uh, we call this service convert amount. For example, this is basically a function which is external to our website. So it allows us to basically call a function. This function will accept some parameters, like from the amount, the currency from which you want to convert to, and the currency that you want to convert to, right? And this will give us a response in return. Okay. This response will be a represented as a structured data. All right. So we might get a certain response. So for example, we'll say we'll get something like the info, which will give us what is the exchange rate. Okay. Then say for example, the exchange rate of one US dollar to 1 rupee is 81, for example. Okay. So this is the exchange rate. Then it will give us the result. Suppose we are giving it the amount that we want to convert to, right? So suppose that value is 5. So it will also give us a result. So that result might be something, whatever is the outcome of 5 times 81, whatever is the outcome for that, that will be available to us as the result. Now this structured data, it needs to be in a format which is understood by you know us as well as the machine. So we have a special format available to us which is known as JSON. Okay, so JSON is nothing but JavaScript object notation. Okay, JSON. Okay, JSON. Okay, and this is basically a so it will we will get a structure which would look something like this, which looks somewhat like an object in JavaScript, but it's not really a object. It's a it's a string representation of a JavaScript object. Okay, so uh, you know whenever we call an API, we get the response in a structured format. So there are other types of structured formats as well. So one of them is JSON. Earlier we used to use something like XML. Okay, you can also get the format in some text also, right? But the most widely used format is JSON, because whatever information that we're looking for is made available to us as a sequence of key value pairs. Okay, and let me show you what a JSON might look like. So we have this object, right? So we'll say let result equals something like this. Now since this JSON notation, or this JSON syntax is quite common, so we have built-in functions right in JavaScript, which allow us to convert from a JSON uh, a JavaScript object to the JSON, and from JSON to a JavaScript object. So suppose I want to convert this into this JavaScript object into its JSON representation. So I can call this function JSON.stringify, and if I give it the result, right, you can see that this is JSON. So as I had mentioned, this is the string representation of a JavaScript object, right? And suppose I want to, this is what I'll basically get as a response from, whenever I'm calling this API, or whenever I'm calling this service, it will give me the response in a standard format known as JSON, right? And when I want to go through this, okay, I want to consume this information, what I can do is I can parse this JSON, and then it will give me back the object representation in JavaScript. you know so we have these two utility functions available, which allow us to convert between a JSON and a JavaScript object. All right, so basically what we're doing is, when we're calling an API, okay, we are requesting for some info. Okay, and in the meantime, the API, the time that it is taking to get that information, we are getting a promise in return. Okay, once the result is available, right, we will get a response. Okay, so once the response is available, the promise will be settled. Okay, and we will either get the JSON, okay, or we'll get some error. All right, so we'll get the data in the JSON format, or we will get some sort of error or some sort of exception, because these are the only two possible outcomes when we get a promise, right? So let's understand this further with the help of a currency converter application. Okay, let me comment out all of this, and let me stop the server. So I have this piece of code available over here, and what we will do is we will create a HTML form. So this form has an ID currency converter, and I've added a couple of labels, okay, from and input to accept the value to, this represents the currency from which we want to convert from, and the currency that we want to convert to, and the amount that we want to convert, okay. And we have linked all of this to a form. When we click on this button, we want the conversion to happen, okay, from one currency format to another. So let's go live with this. Okay, so you can see these are the things which are available. Now next, what we want to do is we want to write the logic. So there is this uh, API available, which allows us to basically fetch the currency information. So this is the link for that. So there's this website known as apilayer.com, okay, and you need to register over here. I've already done that registration. So when you visit this site for the first time, you do a registration, then you go to the API marketplace, you take the free subscription for this service. Basically, you go to API marketplace, then you just search for exchange, okay. We have this exchange rates data API. You select this one, okay. We can see that we have certain endpoints available. This basically means that we have certain functions available to us, right? So as I had shown you over here, that we can call any particular any external function, okay, and that function will accept some parameters, right, and we'll be getting a response, okay, we'll be getting an outcome, right? So these endpoints basically are URLs, okay, which correspond to a certain function which is provided by this service. All right. So you can basically click on this function to get a live demo of all the different functionalities which are available. For the purpose of creating a currency converter, we'll be making use of this convert API or convert endpoint. So I have already gone through the documentation. I will not take further time on explaining all of that part, how this API works. We will see how this API works by consuming it. You guys can go through the documentation on your own, right? uh, and let's implement a simple currency converter now. Okay, let's go back to VS Code. So what we want to do is we want to be able to we want to read all the fields in the form and basically make call that particular service. So let's see how we can do that. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to listen to the DOM content loaded, okay, event. When that happens, what we want to do is we want to basically listen to the submit event on the form. So we will get the form by saying document dot query selector. The form has an ID, which is currency converter, right? This ID. So we're getting that particular form by its ID. And then we want to listen to the submit event. And when that event occurs, right, we want to perform certain actions. So let me expand this slightly now. What we want to do is, the first thing is we want to prevent default, because so this receives an event object as an argument. We want to prevent default because the default functionality is when you click on submit, the URL, uh, not the URL, the website is refreshed. So we do not want any refresh to happen. So that is why we are saying event.prevent default. Next thing that we want to do is we want to access all of these fields, right? Uh, from, to, and the amount field, correct? So what we will do is we will get the target property using destructuring from the event object, and within that we are interested in all of these fields, right? All of these input fields, which is having the name, from, to, and amount respectively. So we'll destructure it further to from, to, and amount like this. Okay. And what we want to do is we want to pass this information to the service which we looked at, right? That this convert function, we want to be able to call that, right? So if we look at the endpoint for this, okay, if you look at the live demo for this, this is the endpoint for this particular you know, service. So you can go through all the different examples over here when you create an account. We'll just use this particular endpoint which allows us to, you know, basically call that function. So in order to call that function, we are using of a built-in API which is provided by the browser. Okay. As I told you, API is a function which is external to your application. So this is a function which is provided by the browser. We specify a URL over here. So in our case, the URL is, you know, apilayer.com exchange rates data, and we are calling this particular endpoint. So there are multiple endpoints available over here, right? So for example, we have symbols, latest, convert, and so on. So these are the different endpoints. So you can see that there's a slash over here. So this is the this is how you know, talk to that service, and this is how you basically access a particular function within that service. Okay. All right. So all of this we can do using a URL, and then there are these additional parameters, right? So as I had shown you over here, so suppose we want to call a function which has these sort of parameters, right? From, to, and the amount that we want to convert, right? So we need a mechanism to specify all of those values, right? So this, all of these are coming, you know, I found out all of this information from the documentation for the API. So you guys can go through the documentation on your own as to what parameters a specific API accepts. So let's replace this. We'll make use of the template literal syntax. And what we want to do is we want to say to, the value for to is the value coming from the input, right? So we will say to dot value like this, right? This is a input element, right? And to access its value programmatically, we make use of the value property. Similarly for this, we'll do something like this, dollar from dot value. And also the next thing that we will be doing is this is the from part and the amount that we want to convert, right? So we will say amount which is coming from this. And since if you notice over here, the type for this is a number, right? So we have a special property available to us when the value is when the input type is a number. So we can directly say value as number. So instead of explicitly getting the value as a string and then calling parseInt, we can avoid all of that, and we can make use of this property known as value as number. So it will convert that string into a number. So we no longer need to call parseInt function, right? So the fetch function, all right, it allows us to access a particular URL. Okay, and then we can pass some request options. So let's take a look what are those. So let me create some request options. Okay, so it's basically an object which tells us what type of what we want to do. So we want to get some information, right? So when you guys are learning backend, at that point of time you will learn how to create your own APIs. And how do you create there's a specific implementation known as REST API. And suppose you want to access a function which is always returning some value. So that type of that action is a HTTP get action. So we can specify something known as the method. Okay, and we are specifying get over here. Okay, then what we want to do is we want to pass some headers to this request. Okay, we are creating a request over here. The fetch API allows us to create a request, and that request has some headers. Okay, so in order to consume this API, when I create an account, I get an API key, and I need to pass that API key. Otherwise, I cannot access the services which are provided by this website. Okay, so let me just copy the API key which is available. Okay, and I'll add the API key over here. So I have created a new header using the header class, and to that I am creating a value which is API key. I'm creating and setting its value to this API key. Okay, so you guys create your own account and you'll be getting your own API key, all right? And that is what I want to pass to the headers over here. Okay, let me just rename this to headers. All right, so using the shorthand property, we don't need to specify uh, the key and its value explicitly. Okay, so we'll pass whatever this header is over here. And what we are doing is we are requesting some data, right? And these are the options which tell us a bit more about the request that we are creating. So the type of method that we are going to call is a get action. Okay, there are other actions available such as put, post, and delete. So these basically tell us that the action that we are going to perform by calling this API. So if we are deleting some data, right? We will specify the method as delete. When we are saving some information to the database, right? So we specify the method as post. When we are updating some information, some existing information, we specify the method as put. Okay, you learn about all of this when you're building your own APIs in the backend part of the course. Okay, but for now just understand that since we are requesting some data, we are specifying the method as get, and we're making use of the fetch API which is provided by the browser. We're providing a URL which allows us to access a function. Okay, and we're passing some request options. So once this is this API call is done, we will get a promise, right? Okay, So let's now, since this is a promise, we can do a dot then on this, right? So the service will give us a response. Okay, when that response is available, okay, what we want to do is we want to say response, and we want to convert that response, we want to parse that response and or convert it into a JSON representation, right? And you can see once again, this is, if you notice over here, this is giving us a promise as well, right? So since this is giving us a promise, we want to further chain the outcome of this. Okay, so once the data has been, the response has been converted into an object, we will finally get it. We will finally get the entire data. And now let's do one thing. Let's log this information to the console. Okay, and I'll save this. Let's go back to our currency converter app. Let me open the console. Okay, and let's specify some values over here. Suppose I want to convert from, €1 and get the INR value for it, and the amount that I want to convert is 5. Okay, so I want to know what is €5 in INR. So when I click on the convert function, okay, so it's basically this event occurred, right? The submit event occurred on the form. We prevented the default. We got all of these values from to an amount. Okay, then we tried to access the API. So we are getting some error over here. Let's take a look. What is the error? So you can see that this is what the API is being called, HTTPS, and then all of the values were replaced. So we want to convert to INR, and you can see that there is this, curly bracket coming over here, right? So this is the thing which is causing the problem. It is not able to understand what is this extra curly bracket. It is not expecting that. So let's get rid of this extra curly bracket. Okay, so since it threw an error, we had it's getting logged in the console directly, right? What is this error object? So it is telling us that there is an invalid currency. You have entered invalid currency, right? So for example, 2 should be, suppose we want to convert, 2 pounds. uh, we need to specify a value like this. But right now what was happening is, instead of, it receiving INR, it was receiving INR and this curly bracket like this, because there was a typing error over here. So we have fixed that. If we wanted to handle this, what we could have done is we could have written a catch statement over here like this, and whatever was the error, we would have logged the error message, okay, to the console, or we can log the entire error object over here. uh, so if I put that, curly bracket back once again, we execute the same thing. Okay, we have handled that issue over here, and you can see that it's logging the error object over here, and this is coming from line number 19. Okay, this is explicitly being printed by JavaScript, right? This happens whenever we make a network call. And in order to see what is the, request that we're making, we can go to the networks tab. Okay, if I and once we click on convert, the request is going through, right? So if we examine this, you can see that the headers that we were passing, so this is the request URL which we have specified as a parameter to the fetch method. You can see that the request method is get. Okay, we're getting some status code because there was some sort of an error. Then if you see the request headers, uh, right? So if we examine the payload over here, um, these were the query string parameters, right? To, from, and amount INR, but with this curly bracket, from and then 5. So these were the values that we were specifying, right? And if we look at the request headers, um, we had added that particular header API key, which is visible to us over here, right? Okay. So this is where you can examine what are the headers going on. If you're not understanding what a header is, when you implement your own or create your own API, you will understand most of these, terminologies, right? Okay. So this is how you can examine the request which is being made, and to view the response which is coming to the server, either you can click on the response or you can click on the preview, right? So you can see that this is the that standard format that we were talking about. We're getting a JSON object, right? Not a JSON object, we're getting a JSON, right, over here. You can see that all of the keys have these double quotes and the values are over here. And if we view the same information in the preview tab, we can see that this is available as a JavaScript object. Okay. So this is the response that we're getting from the server. Okay. So it probably called the reject function internally because the this to parameter was not in the correct format, right? So let's correct that. And let's get rid of this extra curly bracket, and now let's try to do the same thing again. Let's give the amount as 5, and let's open the console. Now when we click on convert, actually let me show you the network request itself. Now you can see this time the request happened successfully. Okay, we are getting the status, right? A status of 200 generally represents a successful response. That means the promise was resolved successfully. Now if we take a look at the preview, we can see that we are getting all of this information, right? So we have this info object which contains the rate, the exchange rate for today, and we are getting the result over here, which is 397.93345 INR. Okay, now let's so this is how you can basically call an API, get the response, and we are logging the response to the console. What we will do now is we will you know log this information instead of the console. We will show this information in the web page itself. So let's create a paragraph. Let's give it a class result. Okay, and what we want to do is, once the data is available, right, we want to basically we want to say document dot get element, or rather get query, not query selector, not get query selector, just query selector. We want to get that element by its class name, which is result. Once we have that available, we will access its text content, and we will set the text content as follows. Let me just copy this so that I know the fields that I want to make use of. All right, so what I want to do is, we want to know what we will log is as per the uh, ex exchange rate, uh, which is, you know, if we see that this is coming from the info object, right? So let's do one thing. We'll say let info comma date. We'll destructure this from the data, right? And we'll access the rate over here. We'll say info dot rate as per the exchange rate for the date today. So we'll specify the date value over here, the converted value in. So we'll take the query object as well. This is the query object, and it has these two properties, right? From and to. The converted value in dollar query. Let's destructure it further. We are interested in two, right? So we'll just specify two over here. In INR is, and we're getting the to final converted value in the result, right? So we'll specify result over here. So let's get the result as well, like this. Let me comment this out. Let's save this. Okay, so what this should do is, once the data is available, it should show this message inside that paragraph. Okay, so let's re-execute the same thing. You can see that we are able to see the outcome over here, right? As per the exchange rate, 79 for whatever for today's date, converted value in INR is this much. Okay, so you can specify other currencies over here. So for example, we want to convert from USD to INR. We want to know the value of 1 INR, right? So once the result is available, it will update that value over here. Okay, let's check in the network tab. You can see uh, the exchange rate for 1 USD is 81 for today's date, and the converted value is 81 point so and so. Okay, and suppose I just want to show up to, two decimal places, so I can say two fixed, and I'll specify the value as 2 over here, and the same thing I can do over here, to fixed, and specify the value over here. Now let's try and convert from USD to INR, and the amount, suppose $2. So the result is that the exchange rate is 81.42 and the converted value is 162.83. So you can specify more currencies over here. So for example, Japanese yen to INR. So this is the value 0.56 and the INR is 1.13. Okay, so one Japanese yen is 0.56 INR. Okay, so you can play around with different currencies, and this is how you can create your own currency converter. Okay, you can represent these fields with a drop down. So there's an API available over here, symbols, which basically gives us the list of all of the currencies available and their, values. So INR is for Indian National Rupee, JPY is for Japanese yen. So all of the supported currency symbols are provided through that API. So you can consume that API, go through its demo, see how you can use it, and replace these input fields with a drop down, so that you no longer have to type those values, and you can select a particular currency from the drop down, and whatever amount you specify over here, and then you click on convert, it will convert that into that particular currency, right? So I can specify any other currency over here. So GBP to euro, for example, EUR. We click on convert, we're getting the exchange rate. So £1 is 1.14 euro basically. Okay. So if you guys have any doubts, you can ask me in the comments. Let's take a break over here and then we'll move on to the next part of the session. So I hope you guys are having a good time. You have understood how to call APIs, how to handle the response, how to, you know, use that response and display that information, how to pass parameters to an API. So all of that, all of those concepts, I hope those are clear to you. And we'll be looking at the rest of the topics after a short break. So I'm glad to read in the comments that you are liking these tutorials, you're finding them amazing. So thanks for the feedback. And that is the idea, to teach you different concepts and then use those concepts to build real world applications. So earlier we were just focusing on learning all of the concepts. Now we'll be, applying all of the things which we have learned and building more, projects. So this was a mini project. We'll be learning how to build a weather app as well in the upcoming session. So yeah, I mean there will be a holiday. The weekend is off. When we meet on Monday or whatever is the next session, that is when we learn how to build a weather app as well. Um, so in case there are any more doubts, you can ask me. So there's a question, what is event.prevent default, right? So let me comment this part out. Actually, I had covered this, but since we're on a break right now, I'll cover it anyways. Let me comment this part out. Uh, if you notice, if I specify the values over here, and I have commented out event.prevent default, right? Just take a look at the URL when I click on the convert button. Okay. You can see that whatever values I had specified, okay, as part of the whatever were the values which were set for the input, they are now shown over here as part of the URL, and the page was refreshed, and that is why all of these values have been reset. So we do not want this behavior to happen. We do not want to share in the URL whatever are the input values typed, because a form tag allows us to submit information, right? It would also call some sort of the other API and provide those parameters as inputs to that API, right? That is where generally a form tag is used to submit information. We want to prevent that default behavior because we are calling a different API over here, right? um, so that is why we had written this statement which prevents the default behavior of submitting that form. Okay, so that is why we have written this statement, right? All right. So let's look at the next topic. So we'll be learning about async and await now. So it is basically a syntactic sugar on top of promises. So whatever we have done so far using promises, we can do the same thing using async and await. It is a newer way in JavaScript to handle promises basically, or do any sort of asynchronous programming. If you're not sure what is asynchronous, what does that mean? So we'll cover that in the upcoming session when we learn about async, not async, when we learn about event loops. But just to give you an idea, what is asynchronous? So if we come to the sources tab and we open the main.js file, right? So if you notice till this point, every all of these statements will be executed line by line, and this particular piece of statement, let's say for example I have a log statement over here, end of function like this. So generally in JavaScript, all these statements are executed line by line, right, one after the other, because JavaScript is synchronous in nature, right? It executes these statements synchronously. But there are scenarios, such as promises, where we know that the outcome will be available at a later point of time. So we do not want the browser to hang for the duration, uh, you know for the time when the data is being fetched from the network, right? So we do not want our browser to hang, right? So we do something known as asynchronous programming. So what basically happens is, let me add a breakpoint over here. Let's provide some values over here. We'll understand this with the help of debugging. When I click on convert, you can see that this function was called, right? The submit event happened and this callback function was called. Now all of the statements will be executed one line after the other. So I'm, you know, basically pressing this key using its shortcut, which is the function and the F10 key. So as I'm pressing the F10 key, we are moving on to the next line, right? Okay. Now, if you notice, we will not, you know, even though this is the next set of statement which is available to us, instead of this, if I proceed with this, you can see that the breakpoint was hit over here and not over here. Okay, because this is an asynchronous operation. Promises allow us to handle responses which come at a later point of time, and we can write asynchronous statements. Basically, promises force these statements within this then block to be executed asynchronously. That means you know the regular flow would have been that after this statement this particular thing would have happened, and then these statements should have been executed. But because promise is asynchronous in nature, these statements are skipped until the time the result is available to us, the outcome is available to us. So then we are directly moving on to this statement, right? So if I proceed with this, you can see that it has logged end of function first, and then once the response was available, it has come inside the fetch block, and these statements are now being executed, right? So because if we take a look at the network tab, you can see that it has taken certain time to fetch the information, right? It has taken us 515 milliseconds, which is approximately half a second, to fetch all of this information. So for example, maybe we're calling an API which is taking maybe a second or 3 seconds to give us a response back. Obviously this is a very slow API, but in the meantime we do not want the browser to hang, right? That is why we have something known as asynchronous programming. because of which, um, you know, we are moving ahead with the rest of the flow. And once the the outcome is available to us, we are resuming from the part where that function had left off, right? So we'll come back to these statements once the outcome was available. Once the promise was resolved, we are executing all of these statements, all right? So that is why first we see the log statement and then we are seeing the outcome over here. Okay. So this is what is meant by asynchronous, execution. But JavaScript by default, it is single threaded and synchronous in nature. How it is able to do something like this, we will find out in one of the upcoming sessions when we learn about the event loop. Okay. All right. So, anyways, let's move on to async and await. So, let's rewrite the same piece of code using async and await. So, we know that this fetch function returns us a promise, right? So, let's do one thing. Let's take the response in a variable known as response, and let's wait for that response to, come back to us. Since we need to wait, we'll make use of the await keyword. Now we have made use of this await keyword, right? Since we have made use of this keyword, we want that the function within which we are writing this await statement, that function needs to be asynchronous, right? So this is the function inside which we have this await statement, right? So just before this, we will write async. Okay, so you can see that red squiggly line has disappeared. So this basically tells the JavaScript that this is an asynchronous function, uh, and there we will be having some operations over here for which we will have to wait. Okay, we will have to skip this function until the outcome is available. So we make use of this await keyword and we wait unless and until the response is available. Okay. Now, once the response is available, so the execution will pause at this statement. Okay. Once the response is available, we know that we want to convert it into a JSON format, right? So we'll say let, or we can say const data equals response, you know, and we want to convert the response into a JSON. As you can see, once again, this is returning a promise. So we'll write the await statement over here because we want to wait till the object, has been converted into uh, a JavaScript object. So we want to wait for that operation to happen. Once that has happened, what we will do is, let me just copy this for now. I'll keep both of the ways of doing the things available to you guys. So when you refer back to this code, you have both of the ways of fetching the information available. So let's do one thing. Let me comment this part out and paste the code that we had written so far. Let me add back the async keyword over here. Then once we have the data available, we'll do the same thing that we were doing over here. Let's copy this and paste it over here. So once we have the data available, we want to, you know, destructure it, right? And let me uncomment this. What is it saying? Redeclaration of variable 2. Where have we redeclared it? Okay. Okay. Let's give this an alias. Okay. Converted to, and let's use this over here. All right. And so we have successfully converted the promise way of doing things into async and await. So it's basically doing the same thing under the hood. We are calling this API, you know, when and we are waiting for the response, right? So since we want to wait, we are making use of this await keyword. Then once the response is available, that will be assigned to this variable. Next thing we want to do is we want to convert this into a JSON, get the JavaScript object out of this. So we are calling this function, which in turn gives us a promise as well. So we write the await keyword, and once the object is available to us, we are destructuring it and writing it over here. Let's try this out whether this is working correctly. Let's take a look at the execution over here as well. So you can see that instead of first coming to this particular statement, right, it has come to these statements, right? So what this is doing is it is pausing the execution over here, right? So this entire function is asynchronous, right? Okay. So uh, suppose I have, so it's doing the same thing basically. We're getting the response, moving on to the next part. Now all of these statements are coming after the await, right? So it's, pausing the execution over here. Once the response is back, it is moving ahead, right? So let's click on this function once again. All of the statements are executed line by line up till this point. Okay, we reached this point, we went ahead. Now it's trying to fetch that information. You can see the status is pending, right? So because the promise is neither resolved nor rejected, and now it has been, resolved. That is why we are back over here. We have got the response, then we are getting the data, and then we are moving on to the next part. Okay, all right. So this is how we can rewrite the same thing using async and await. It's just an easier way to, do the same thing instead of having these, multiple then statements and all of that. It is easier to somewhat write this way of doing the same thing. And in order to handle errors, what we can do is we can write all of this inside a try block. Okay, and if there is an error, we can provide a catch block over here, catch the error and log the error uh, to the console. Okay, and then similar, I mean, this is similar to the thing that we were doing over here, right? When the thing happens successfully, we move on to the next statement. So you don't need to do all of this promise chaining and all. You are directly getting the output over here like this. Okay, this is generally how we are used to writing JavaScript, right? So it's easier to make use of async and await and do the same thing. Okay, instead of writing, then dot then and all of this, it gets a bit confusing, right? So this is a simpler way of doing the same thing. And how we used to have a catch block over here, we are writing the same thing over here, right? And we are explicitly specifying a try and catch statement. And similarly, we have a finally over here as well. So whatever we specify over here is called irrespective of whether the error happens or not, right? So finally block like this. Okay, and let's close this. Euro INR 1 euro. We're getting the response over here. Suppose I specify, some incorrect value. Let me close all the breakpoints. So instead of INR, I specify INR A. For example, I click on convert. And if we go to the console, we can see that it is giving us some error. And this is the error that cannot read. We have kind of given it in an incorrect format. It was not able to read the to property. Where is this coming from? Line number. Okay, so this is what was logged in the console, right? So this was handled within the catch block, and then the finally block uh, was executed, right? Um, so this is how you can write the same set of statements using async and await. Is just syntactic sugar on top of the promise API which was provided, which we were using earlier. Okay, so I hope async and await is clear to you guys. So are there any question with respect to this? So we also learned about the try catch block. So this is something that you can always use whenever you're doing some sort of an operation and you're expecting some error might occur. So you can make use of you can handle that error gracefully using the try and catch statements. So in terms of overview, to enable async and await functionality, the first thing is that the function within which you're writing the await statement, it needs to begin with the async keyword, right? Then wherever that you are performing some sort of operation which is asynchronous in nature, right? The value will be available at a later point of time, and you want to wait for the execution for that. You want to wait for the output for that, so you write the await statement. So once the execution is happening, it will pause the execution of this function, of that asynchronous function right over there, and move on to the next set of functions which are out of the outside the await. So for example, uh, what I'm doing is I'm adding another you know event listener to the form, right? So let me copy this. So another function will be executed when the submit event happens. This is not asynchronous in nature, right? So I'll just log over here regular synchronous function, right? So once it encounters this await statement, right, it will pause the execution of that function right there, and it will move on to the next set of statements that need to be executed. So if we take a look at the log statements now, you can see that the execution was paused for that function till it got the response, and in the meantime it moved on to the next function, right, which was this one. So again, that is why we are seeing a regular synchronous function statement being printed first, then this finally block, and then this end of execution, right? Because it paused the execution of this function at that particular point. Okay, and once the data was available, it resumed executing that function from this statement itself. Okay, so then the next set of statements are executed one by one. That is how the async and await functionality works. Okay, so I hope it is clear uh, to you guys. So it does not hold the execution of the rest of the functions, right? So this is a function which gets called after this function is executed, right? So let me put a log statement over here. Console.log async function called first, right? So you can see it is printing a sync function called first. It paused the execution when it encountered this await statement, right? Then it went ahead with rest of the functionality. So that is why this function, you can see this log statement, and then when the result was available, okay, so we can say that, you know, we can log the response over here. Or rather, let's just log the data, right? So if I do the execution now, I guess it should be very clear to you guys that async function was called first. The execution was paused, so it went ahead with the next set of statements. Then, once the response was available, right, it resumed the execution of that function from that point. Okay, so then we have the log statement over here, then the log statement from the finally block, and then end of function finally. Okay, so I hope the flow for an asynchronous function is clear to you guys. Okay, then the next set of topics that we will be looking at are related to, new data structures which are available in JavaScript. Okay, so yeah, I mean, in terms of functionality, it is the same thing as a promise, just the way of writing things is a bit different, and the behavior changes just a bit, because you know if we look at this, the promise based version of this, um, this console.log statement, this one was called first, right? Now since this itself is part of the async function, even its execution was paused, right? So whatever you write after the await statement is only executed once the result of that await statement is available. Okay, if it happens successfully, these set of statements will be executed. If there's an error, whatever is provided in the catch block, those statements will be executed, right? So that is one difference between the two, right? Because over here we were creating different functions internally, right? So there was a different, scope for these functions and this function. Okay, these functions, these internal, callback functions, these were asynchronous in nature, so their execution was paused, right? But basically, yeah, they're the same thing. Promises, how you handle promises, and how you handle asynchronous data using promises or async await internally is doing the same thing. Is just, syntactic sugar, which basically means, you know upfront you see something else, but behind the scenes it's the same thing. Okay, so I mean, it depends, right? What do you find easier to write and express, easier to use, you use that. This is something which was made available later on. Earlier, we always used to handle promises using then and, dot then and dot catch. Then in one of the recent versions, async and await statements were made available. So this is something which is more recent. So it's not like which one to use, which one to not use. Whatever you are comfortable with, use that way, right? But there are certain scenarios when we come across those scenarios, you will find out when it is better to use the then way of doing things, and when it is better to do it using async and await. Okay. um, so I hope the difference between the two is clear. They're basically the same thing. Now let's look at the next set of examples. So what we want to learn about is, let me create a new folder, data structures, new data structures which are available in JavaScript. Let me create a index.html. Okay, not a folder, a file. And let's add a main.js over here. So we learn about the set and map data structures. All right, and let's link the script file. So script source main.js. Let me stop the execution and start the execution for this one. Okay, so there are some newer data structures available. So the first one that we will be looking at is the set data structure. So what this allows us to do is that it allows us to you know uh, store unique values. So for example, let's create a new set over here. So let set of numbers equals new set, like this. And then when we want to add a new value to a set, we can make use of the add function. Suppose we want to add the value to, then we want to add another number which is 5. Okay, and similarly we want to add 7 to this, and let's log all of this in the console. Okay, so you can see that we have created a new set which has 3 entries, right? 2, 5 and 7. Now this data structure is useful whenever we want to store unique values, right? And it is also useful whenever we want to do certain operations. So if you have ever worked with set theory, there are operations like union, intersection. You want to find out what is common between two different sets, what is the difference between two sets. So all of those those sort of operations can be performed using this object. You need to implement those, right? And it has some functions like, suppose I want to know whether this set has the number 5 in it. Okay, so I can say set dot has, and I specify the value, and it will let me know whether this is true or false. So set of numbers dot has 5, so it is giving me the result as true, right? Suppose I specify 3 over here, I'm getting the response as false. Suppose I want to remove a particular value, I can say set of numbers dot delete 7, and let's copy this statement and place it over here. When I save this, you can see that we have deleted the number 7, and now the set just contains 2 and 5. If I want to get rid of all of the numbers, I can say set of numbers dot clear, and this will basically set of numbers dot clear, and this will clear all of the values which are there in the set. So if I now look at set of numbers, you can see that its size is 0. If I save this, you can see that a set has a size property which basically tells us how many items are there in a set. Okay. uh, so you can use this to store unique values, right, as I mentioned. So you can s- pass an array over here as well. So for example, we have an array. We have a list of numbers which have some duplicate values in them. So for example, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, and 6, and then 7, right? Something like this. If I pass this to a set, okay, I can pass an array as an argument to the constructor for this set. Okay, you can see that it is giving me all of the unique values. It has gotten rid of all the duplicates, right? So we just see 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? So this is how you can, this is one of the applications of set where you can get rid of duplicates in an array very easily, right? um so suppose you want to read the values of an array. If you try to do something like set of numbers, right, and so I want to do, access, for example, the first value, I can't do something like this. It's not giving me anything. This is not an array, right? We get something known as entries. Okay, so in order to access that, we can make use of the values. Okay, you can see that it's giving me this iterator. So what I can do is I can make use of the for of loop. So I can do something like, let me copy this, let item of this set, and let's log whatever this is in the console. So I can't do something like this. Let's take this in a variable, right? And if I do new set, okay, so it's printing all of the unique values 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 from this set one by one. All right. Um, so this is how you can access the different values of a set. Okay. And similarly, we have another data structure available to us, which is maps, right? So this represents a key value pair. Okay, so some of the properties are similar to that of a map, and another thing is the order in which we insert the values inside a map. It remembers that order. So let's take a look at how we can create a map. So let map equals new map. Okay, and we want to add some items, right? So we say map dot set, we specify a key. So this is the key, and we can either store another, we can provide any data type over here. The key can also be any data type. It can be any primitive value, or it can be an object, and similarly the value can also be an object, right? So suppose I add, 1 over here like this. If we check out the value over here in the console, you can see that it has, this mapping 1 and 1. This is the key, this is the value. If I want to access this value, I can just say map.get. If you guys have worked with data structures and if you're aware of a hash map, this is what this is similar to, right? You have a key and then you can access the value using that key, right? So if I want to get the value for this particular key, I'm getting the value over here like this. So let's further understand the operations that we can do using a map with an example. So suppose you want to find the list of not the list, find the occurrence of each letter in a sentence. Okay, so let's try and implement this. So let map equal new map. Okay, and we'll create a sentence equals new, not new, let's just provide a string over here. This is a sentence. Let me make this capital. Okay, and we want to find the occurrence of each letter, how many times each letter occurs within this sentence, right? So we will say for let letter of sentence, we want to make use of the split function. We want to split this sentence using nothing, right? So we'll get individual characters, and we want to loop through all of the individual characters. What we will do now is we will say if map has the letter, right, we want to add the count by 1. If it doesn't have that letter already available within it, what we will do is we will add a new key to this map, right? So we will say map dot set, the key is the letter and the value is 0 or value is 1, right? So initially the count for that letter is 1. So let's implement the logic where the letter is already available, right? We have already encountered a letter within a sentence. So what we'll do is and we'll also make this case insensitive. So what we will do is we will say map dot has letter dot to lowercase, right? Then we will say let's get the existing count. So we will say map dot get letter. Let's store this inside a variable. Okay, so if map has this letter, right, we will get the value for that letter, which was nothing but the count. We get the existing count, and what we will do is we will once again say map dot set. We will update the value and we will add 1 to it. Okay, so we have updated the count for that particular letter. And now once we have done all of this, let's log the result in the console. So you can see that uh, one sec, we need to say case insensitive letter over here as well. So you can see that a dictionary sort of has been created. So the letter T appears twice, right? This is a sentence, so T over here and T over here. And then H appears once, I appears once, S is coming thrice, 1, 2 and 3, right? So it's giving us the number of times each of these characters is coming, right? So we can see that it's 212 and so on. All right, so this is how you can easily make use of the correct data structure to solve this, algorithm. So in case you guys were missing DSA, uh, this was an example of that. And um, yeah, so we have all of these. So if you want to go through all of the values, right? So we can say map dot and so if you want to know all the keys, right, all the letters which are there, so we can make use of the map dot keys function, which is giving us an iterator and it has the list of all of the keys, right? And similar to this, we have something known as the values. Okay, so we are getting all of the values which are stored. Now we have a special function which is available to us, which is known as array.from. This is a utility function which allows us to convert either an array from one format to another or a array like structure into an array, right? So for example, what we want to do is we want to convert, you know this into into an array. What we will do is we will say map. Okay, we want to map array from this map. We want to convert this into an array. So if we look at these entries, right, there is this is an object which has a key and a value, right? So it's giving us an array. This is an array of arrays basically. So we are providing a callback function. We're using destructuring to access the key and the value. And let's do one thing. Let this function return just the value part, okay? And let's log this in the console. So I will say console.log. And if we take a look at this, we have just logged all of the values over here, right? Okay. Now suppose I want to convert, this. Suppose I do not destructure this. I'm just getting, some item over here, and if I log it directly, okay, it is converting that map into an array. So we're getting an array of arrays, right? So if you see, this is an array and it has all of these values, and this is internally again an array, right? Suppose I want to convert this array into an array of objects. What I can do is I can destructure this further. I can say key and value, right? So that I have access to this. And we are saying key comma value over here. We are returning an object which has the properties key and value. This is the shorthand syntax which we had learned yesterday. So now if we take a look at the console, we are getting an array of objects where the key is the letter and the value is its occurrence, right? So this is how you can convert an array like structure back into an array. So you can do that using array.from. Similarly, we can use that on a set as well. um, so for example, we have this set, right, and I want to convert this into an array. I can say console.log array.from. We specify the new set over here and we want to convert that into an array, so we just say item and we just want to return that item, right? So you can see that this set 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This has been converted into an array, right? So you can see its prototype is an array. So this function is pretty useful for converting a map or a set into an array, right? Um, so for example, what we want to do is I think these are sufficient examples for the array.from method. Let's take a look at some of the other array functions. So suppose I have an array which has these values 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And what I want to do is I want to know whether some of the elements in this array are even numbers or not. So I can make use of a function known as sum. Okay, this expects a callback, right? So each value will be called over here one by one, and we will check whether each item in the array, if it's divisible by 2 and it leaves a remainder of 0, if if even one of these values is even, okay, this will give us true as the result for this. Okay, so let's log this to the console, and we'll just say sum. Okay, and you can see that some of them are even, right? So 2 and 4 is even, right? Suppose we want to check whether every element in the array is even, so there's another function known as every, right? So it will evaluate this condition and it will only return true if this condition is satisfied for all the items in the array. Whereas in case of sum, even if one of the items satisfies this condition, we would get the result as true. So over here we're getting the result as false, right? Yeah. So every item in this array is not an even number. Suppose I replace this with 6, and this with 8, and this with 10, right? I'm getting true for every function as well, because every element in the array is an even number, right? And similar to this, we have the you know a function known as the map function, which basically converts one type of array to a another type, and it returns it as a new array basically. Okay, so what we will do now is, let's say I have this key value pair, this particular this thing. Let me just copy it over here. Okay, and let's log this in the console. So the key value array is available, and then what we want to do is we want to just extract the values, right? We are just interested in all the values which are there. So what I can say is kvarray.map. I provide the callback function, so item in the, or rather current item. Okay, and then what I want to do is I just want to flatten this array, right now it's, me comment this out. If we take a look at this is an array of objects. Suppose I want to just convert this into a flat array of integers. So what I can do is I can just say current item dot value. Okay, that is what this function is returning. And let's log this in the console. And you can see that this array has been converted into an array of integers, right? So this was one type of array, an array of objects. We mapped it into another type, and this is a new instance of that array, right? This is a completely new array. It's not modifying the KV array basically, right? If I log this statement once again over here, you can see that it has not modified the original array. So this is before the call. This is performing that operation, and then this is we're logging the same array, kv array. Once again, it has not been modified, so it's returning a new array. So is this clear to you guys? The map, array.from, array.sum, array.every, all of these functions, are these clear to you? In case they're not, we'll cover these in the doubt sessions in the voice channel right after this stream ends. um so um Okay. So if you guys remember yesterday, I was trying to show you an example where we were trying to, override the filter prototype, right, on the array, and we wanted to implement the part where we wanted to log each item before it was filtered, right? So what we want to do is we want to modify the array filter prototype, right? So array dot filter, we want to modify its default behavior using the prototype, right? So we can do that. So let's take a reference of the original filter function. So I'll say array dot prototype dot filter. So I have the original filter function over here. I want to override its functionality, so I'll say array dot prototype dot filter. I'll pass a new function over here. Okay, then what I want to do is I want to access the original filter function. Okay, suppose I want to do the same thing. I want to filter out all the even numbers. So let's me copy this array, and let me pass it over here, and this is the function that I want to call. This is my filtering condition dot filter. Okay, and let's log this to the console. So console dot log. All right. So we are having access to the original filter function. If you take a look at this, it is getting this callback, right? This is the callback function, which is passed to the filter function. So let's get the callback function over here like this, CB. And then this is the array on which we are calling the filter function, right? So as we know that we get the special property known as this, which points to this object over here basically. So to access this array, we are basically uh, going to make use of this. Okay, so this is basically reference to the array on which filter is being applied, right? So we pass this over here, Then what we want to do is this accepts a callback, right? So we define our own callback. So this callbacks receives an individual item, and what we want to do is we want to log this item right to the console. So we are doing that. Once this functionality is being done by the original filter, we want to return the result, right? And what we also want to do is we want to pass this to the callback that we have specified over here, right? We want the condition to be executed. So we will say return cb, and we will call it with the item that we are getting. Okay, right? So basically this callback function is being passed over here. Okay, and then we are, whatever is being returned by the condition that we have specified over here, that is being returned to this original filter function if the condition is true. Okay, so let's save this, and let me change this to say 1 3 6 and 8 like this. So this should only return only the even numbers, and it should print all of the items in this array. It should log all of them, right? This is the expected behavior. So let's save this. Can be called on null. Where is this coming from? Line 72. Okay, just give me a sec. Let's add a breakpoint over here. So as we looked over here, this is the entire set of items. Let's go ahead. So we are saying array.prototype.filter. We are giving it a function. We're giving this a callback. Then we are calling it over here, returning the original filter. Oh yeah, I need to make use of the call statement, right? Because I am trying to invoke this function. As we had learned earlier, there are different ways of calling a function, right? So we are making use of the call function, right? Even a function is an object, right, in JavaScript, and on that we are making use of this special property known as call, and we are passing this, which is nothing but the set of items, and we are defining our own callback, and then passing the item which is received by this callback to this callback which we are getting from this filter function, right? So let's save this. Let's take a look in the let me get rid of all of the breakpoints, remove all breakpoints. Let's move with the execution, and you can see that it has logged all of the items in an array, right? And also returned us all of the even numbers. So this is how you can extend the functionality of any existing uh, you know uh, prototype functionality, and it is available to all the elements which are based on that prototype, right? So we wanted to log the values as well as do the filtering functionality. So that is how we extended the existing, filter functionality using the prototype object like this. Okay. And similarly, we were facing another issue yesterday that, when we were looking at the object dot assign example, right, which was something like this. And I had told you guys that I'll get back to you on why this wasn't working. So if we look at this example, we have this org object, right? We are making use of object.create and passing this, which will be considered as the prototype for this, object. Then we have this, we're defining a new object over here, which is having the key as first name and its value is set to foo, right? So the second parameter, which is, available to this object.create, it follows something known as, the structure returned by this method known as object.define property. Okay, so what this allows us to do is define the behavior of, you know the properties that are being set on an object. So let's take a look at this object dot define property method. Okay, so I have an object and I say object dot define property. So let's create an object, say new object. It is empty by default. I pass the reference to the object over here, and then I specify the different properties that are available on this. So suppose I want to add a variable age, and then I want to specify the behavior for this property. So by default, the value for age is say 42. Okay. Then it has additional properties known as enumerable, right? Which is false if you do not specify it. If I set this to true, for example, okay, property descriptor must be an object. Which line are we on? Let me just comment this out for now. Okay, property description must be an object. So we're looking at, so we have the age, we are specifying this main object. Then within that we are defining the age, we are specifying its value. Object dot define, okay, not define property, properties, that is the name of the function. Okay, all right. And now and suppose there's another property known as writable. By default it is false, right? If I set the sorry, by default it is true. If I set this to false, for example, okay, and I have access to new object over here like this, I can see that obj new object dot age is 42. Now I want to modify this, right? I want to set this to say 28, for example. Okay, you can see that the update has happened, but if we, you know print the age once again, you can see that it's still 42. So what this property does is that it specifies whether this value is, writable. Okay, whether you can change its value using the assignment operator. Since we have set this to false, right, it's not updating the value. And similarly we have a property known as enumerable. So there are certain functions available in on the object class. So suppose we say object dot uh, you know keys, right? And we want to get all the keys which are there. Right now enumerable property is true, so it's giving me, it's returning a list of keys which are available on this object. So age is a key, right? Suppose I set enumerable to false. Okay, line 94. I accidentally typed a character, and now if I say object dot keys and I pass the new object over here, you can see that it's returning an empty array. That's because enumerable property was set to true. So what this enumerable property allows us to do is that it allows us to, you know, look inside the object and access the internal properties of an object, get all of its keys, get all of its values, right? So suppose I do something like object dot values new object. I'm still getting an empty array. If I turn this back to true, okay, you can see that when I execute object dot values, I'm getting all of the values which were set for a key. Okay, so this is how, I mean, the object dot define property works. There are another set of properties which are available. You can go through them in the list of resources which are provided with the assignment, which is associated with this session. You can go through those on your own. So when we are creating an object using object dot create, so if you look at this is the structure that we are following while using the object dot define properties. This is what it is expecting over here. If I omit the enumerable property, basically the default value for that is false, right? And when we were trying to merge it over here with this object, okay, let's log this merged object in the console. We were only viewing BMW, we are only seeing BMW. That's because object.assign only merges the enumerable properties, right, of an object. Okay, so if you notice over here, some person was created based on an org, right? So some person, let's log this, or rather let's just view it over here just to save time. If you examine, some person has this property first name and its prototype has the org, right? Now whatever is available in the prototype is not enumerable, right? Because it is not its own property. So it only merges those properties which are its own and which are enumerable. So by default this is false. If I set the enumerable property to true, right, and we look at the this log statement over here, we can see that first name as well as the car property is available to us, right? Okay, so that is another thing which I wanted to clarify, that the assign function only merges the object's enumerable property. So we can specify multiple objects over here, whatever are the enumerable properties and which only belong to that object, only those properties are merged, right? So if I do like some person dot has own property org, it will give me the result as false, right? And if I provide first name over here, it is giving me true because this is its own property and this is not its own property. Okay, so I hope these two doubts are clear from yesterday's session. Okay, why it was not merging foo in this object, because we had by default enumerable is set to false. Okay, and the moment we set it to true, it was being merged. All right. uh, so uh, this is it for this session, and I hope you guys learned a lot of concepts today, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys apply all of those concepts. Try out more APIs on your own. As a homework, try to extend this currency converter which we have used, make use of the symbol API and get all of the values as drop downs. Okay, make this better, style this further, and you can add this project to your portfolio. You can host it on Netlify and add this to your portfolio. You can show uh, you know prospective employers that how to make API calls. You can build simple apps. So this is it. So I'll see you guys in the doubt session in the Discord voice channel now, and we'll meet in the next session on Monday. Okay, so happy weekend. um, Bye and good night if you are in India, and for the rest of the people, if you are in a different time zone, have a wonderful rest of the day for you, and see you guys.